All right, so I'm here again with Sherry and James. We're continuing our discussion of the hierarchy in heaven and earth by Douglas Harding, and today we're discussing chapters 13 and 14 of part four. Um, is there any particular place you guys wanted to start that stood out as like the most salient bit
Yeah,
for
I
you
think it's
guys?
part three, right? Part three is just these two chapters.
Yeah, part three. Yeah, you're right. Part three, not part four. Yes, you
Yeah.
got that right. Yeah, and it's just we decided to do that because it's just the two chapters together.
Yeah, I think
Um,
maybe just because the first two paragraphs I think kind of situate the whole first and second part of the book. If you want me to read that real quick.
yeah, and that's where he establishes the pairs. So yeah, go for
Yeah,
it.
right before he says, so it starts out hierarchical pairs. The chapter is entitled "The Law of Hierarchical Symmetry," and he says, "What am I? In this chapter and in the next, I bring together the various regional views collected by the receding observer in part two, and combine them in a spatial self-portrait before going on to part four and to add the time dimension." And he says, "Science offers me a huge mass of piecemeal information about my nature, level by level, but the work of making sense of it by relating the levels has scarcely begun. The laws of hierarchical order, the vertical go of things, the kind of connections between levels that departmentalized science now finds at each level, these are the work of the unitary science of the future. Here I can only make the beginning." So I think that's right on. I think I've gotten this thread through the whole book of, uh, it's a way of preserving difference, a way of preserving the differentiation and specialization of all the different sciences that have taken us so far. And his whole, I think, idea is to reverse that, preserve the difference, and then find the unity through all these different
Right,
specializations. But once you distribute, human consciousness through all these specializations, who's going to weave the thread back through? It's like, so that's why I think he says it's work of the unitary science of the future. Here I can only make a beginning, and this was
right,
1950s. So
right.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and we can only hope that science does make that a unitary turn eventually. I
Is
think we're
science going
starting.
to do it? Is science going to do it? It's going
Well,
to be some meta science or some like science, real scientific metaphysics or something.
that's a really good question, James. I think you're seeing that science is already taking a metaphysical turn, though.
Mm-hmm.
And
It had to.
this is right, and this is fresh on my mind because Sherry and I just had a conversation with a group of people about the Ian McGilchrist Jordan Peterson conversation, and McGilchrist is like definitely one of the people that is definitely pushing for science to rediscover metaphysics.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, I would say McGilchrist's particular flavor of metaphysics is more than implicitly theological.
Mm-hmm. And I think he would
So
deny that, though. But I agree. But I think he.
yeah, he actually doesn't deny it. He wants to make sure that he denies the idea of an engineering god,
Mm-hmm.
of a planning god. He's more of a process theist or an open theist, but he doesn't deny like the concept of divinity per se.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
Yeah, I
yeah.
like that. I enjoyed that talk with Jordan, and we had a little. I don't know. Were you guys on that Discord discussion? There was a Discord discussion about it.
Oh really?
I don't know where. I don't know if it was Symbolic World or. Yeah, I enjoyed it as well.
I
Yeah.
really wish I kind of wish that Paul hadn't decided to tackle the Stephen Fry Peterson conversation first. I really thought that was a much more important conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason it's an important conversation is because it's like it's reflective of this turn. So I think Harding was kind of right in saying that in foreseeing that science would have to do this, because in the early 50s when he's writing this is when quantum physics is beginning to get to, beginning to get as far as you can go by breaking things down into
Mm-hmm.
parts. Like we've reached the maximum limit of that. So
Yeah.
if you think, so it's like it's almost becomes inevitable as like we pass through the bottom of materiality. We've gone as far down as we can. We've like our collective consciousness has basically reached the substratum, and
Hmm.
we've discovered it's nothing, which is why we have this nihilistic meaning crisis on our hands. So
Hmm.
we realize if you just that ultimately that path leads to nothing. So now we just need the turn
Hmm.
where the realization happens that nothingness at the substratum opens up into the whole and to
Yeah.
everything.
Yeah.
So
Even
Do you?
Oppenheimer had made a quote from the like the Bhagavad Gita, like
yeah,
something about I forgot the quote, but yeah. Sorry, go ahead, sure.
I'm just wondering. Like, I get the sense that because of artificial intelligence,
mm,
now consciousness has become a subject, right? A thing to be looking into because they're trying to make artificial intelligence capable of making the same kinds of choices that human beings do, but we make our choices. It's so complicated.
so are you
Hmm.
suggesting, this is interesting, I've never thought of this before, are you suggesting that it's actually our our desire to create artificial intelligence that is forcing us to realize that our mechanistic model of consciousness
I
is
think so.
broken?
Yeah.
Because if it were correct, we'd be able to do it.
Well,
Hmm.
see, the
And the
first, I
fact
think
that, go
the first,
ahead.
the first seems to me that, like, I don't know a whole lot about this, but I followed a little bit of it. And it seems to me the first thing that they discovered was that this consciousness needs to be embodied, right?
Hmm.
Right.
And I don't, when you're looking at the world mechanistically, then you make the assumption that machines don't need bodies, right? Like, I think it was in that Bach thing that we did this morning. He talked about how we became more mechanistic when we got further away from um, interacting with the natural world, and he used the horse and cart as an example, right? So, that you had the horse and cart, and then people moved to cars.
Mm,
The horse had an intelligence and a body and blood, and right, whereas the car is just a machine.
Hmm.
So yeah, I think that the quest for artificial, like, to perfect artificial intelligence is going to naturally bring in a more metaphysical approach to science. I thought about it when I read what's that guy, Thomas Nagel,
mm-hmm.
Hmm.
Mind and Cosmos. You know, when I read that book, I thought to myself, okay, now they're digging in, right?
Mm.
They're digging into something that was just a hard problem, and they kind of neglected it because they didn't need it, but now they need it, and now it's become more complex than they could have imagined. So I just have the feeling that it's going to be responsible for that metaphysical turn in
Yeah, I
science.
think
Right.
that's a good insight because I could just had this flash in my head of like room full of scientists just super nerdy, finally gonna find out what the substructure of reality is, and then like finding out, oh, okay, there's nothing here. All right, guys, what do we do, guys? Let's build the demon machine. All right, let's do it. What else are we gonna do at this point? And then they just started building this thing. But the idea of artificial intelligence, what is artificial about it? We're using our intelligence to build something. We're imbuing it with our intelligence. What's artificial about it? That
Yeah,
it's not human, you know?
That's
it's a
interesting.
strange term. Harding would definitely object to that because there's an earlier section of the book, I think it's chapter 7, where he actually goes to great length to point out that human artifice is actually doubly natural, right?
Hmm.
He's like
Yeah.
that there's
Yeah.
nothing that it's like uh and he has that line about, nature may be red in tooth and claw, but some of her claws have turned into scalpels and the instruments of healing.
Oh man, but if you take that process to the end, maybe the red in tooth and claw, returns in the artificial intelligence. It's like nature.
Yeah, there is certainly something scary about it. I definitely, we have like, and it's like we obviously like we culturally we have this intuition because we make these movies, right?
Hmm.
Mhm, mhm.
All the time where we imagine like what would happen, and I think it. So here's the thing. It's like, okay, so if we if the artificial intelligence is going to think that um that power and grasping and control are what are to be desired, then that will become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like those science fiction themes will become prophetic. So the question is can an artificial intelligence be taught to love? Is the question.
Yeah, Sam Harris was talking with Lex Friedman on the podcast last week, and they talked about exactly that. And then what happens if the artificial intelligence, by all measures, is appearing to love, right? All of a sudden, they're going to get rights, right? Like because
Right.
they're gonna appear to be conscious, and then they're going to get imbued with rights in a sense, and then it kind of goes from there. So it's kind of strange, and we're kind of on the precipice. And just maybe one more aside, that there's this idea that the blockchain Bitcoin was created by an anonymous somebody, Satoshi Nakamoto. Nobody knows who it is. So this idea is that artificial intelligence has already essentially taken over, right? And it's using the blockchain, right, to build its body. So there's this idea that the humans are the sex organs of the machines. So
Yeah,
the
I've heard that idea
blockchain,
before.
so the blockchain is using itself, because what does Bitcoin do? What does cryptocurrency do? It plugs right into the source of Earth, right? It uses electricity, and it takes that electricity through mining, right, and it creates value. So instead of mining gold, which takes millions of years to coalesce, we're going straight to the source. No more windmills, no more water energy, straight to the source, and just transferring the Earth's energy into value to exchange with, in a sense. And it's like, that's a rabbit hole to go down, that the blockchain technology. But I
Right.
think it's related to have you seen the robot Sophia,
Mhm.
the artificial intelligence robot Sophia? So
No.
it's created by it's actually the first robot that got citizenship in Saudi Arabia. It's got its own cryptocurrency. And if you just look up Sophia artificial intelligence, you'll see her. She's kind of got a bald head. It's really crazy.
Sophia is and that's an interesting name to
Yeah,
choose.
yeah, it is.
Right.
Wow.
It's
Full
like,
circle.
yeah, that is a very interesting name to choose.
Yep.
So yeah, I mean, yeah, and thinking about it, like, I mean, like, what kind of like intelligence could you even possibly like? Even if, let's say we're being, I mean, let's say it's even apparent. I don't think it could actually be successful, but let's say you get to the point like on the path that we're pursuing where it's apparently successful. It's like, well, what kind of intelligence is it going to? It's really only going to, looking back to that, that McGilchrist and Peterson conversation. It's really only going to emulate the left-brained intelligence only.
Right. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that's
Like
right.
you can't. You're there. So the most of what it is that makes us up would be missing from it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the
So
Okay. Yeah.
master would be missing, and the emissary who thinks he's a master would be present, and that to
right.
me is a tyrant.
So it'd
Which
be
is a
us only
nightmare. Yeah.
worse. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like we're encoding. They say, oh, we got to be careful what we encode into artificial intelligence. But what about what we're encoding subconsciously? Like you see what social media has become, right? It's like
Right.
pulling sin out of people. You just multiply that up, and we're unconsciously encoding our human masters, our future masters here. Um, but use the biblical narrative. There's a story that says what happens
But while all this
when it
stuff, but
happens.
but I will say, to get back to what I was saying earlier, yes, there is this dark thing. There's this dark. There's definitely that dark movement that's going on too, and definitely there's lots of people that are still all in on transhumanism. But then you also have some voices that are coming like from within the scientific community
Yeah.
that are starting to point toward, I would say, what I would say looks like a metaphysics of enchantment or beauty,
Mm-hmm.
which can actually like lead to a positive turn. And it's just like, I don't know which story is going to win out. I mean, I don't know, and I can't predict the future. I hope it's the story of enchantment and beauty, and and not more of the world of dead objects
Yeah.
until we destroy ourselves.
Yeah.
But
I guess we'll find out sooner
yeah,
than later.
yeah, we will find out eventually. So, um, so we've gotten pretty far afield from Harding's book at this point, but it was interesting enough that I thought it was worth pursuing. You read the very introduction, and then like right after that, he kind of lays out like these sets of hierarchical pairs, and how, like we already have heard from earlier chapters, like that the whole is related to the center. So like the ultimate substratum, the nothing center is actually ends up being related to the whole. And
Mhm.
then he says electron, maybe in more contemporary thought we might say particle is related to galaxy, which is like, the next level, like below the whole, and like so on. So basically, as you as you as you scale up in complexity, it's actually it's actually slightly more distant from the whole.
Mhm.
What do you guys think about that? That might seem a little bit counterintuitive, right? Like, because one might expect that, one might expect like man to be like, if you consider, I mean, if you actually do consider man at, at the top of the hierarchy of, say, at least like the um created order, one might expect man to be, well, I guess man's in the middle, because
Mhm.
this is the hierarchy of heaven and earth. So he's considering like the planet and the sun and the solar system and all of these things to be higher up the hierarchy than we are. So we kind of like rest in the middle.
Mhm. Yep. Yeah.
Um,
So I just want to understand this. So he's saying that the farther up you go, the farther away from the whole you get. What you said?
well, humanity is further from the whole than the center is closest to the whole, right?
Yes.
So humanity, like, it's almost as if he's saying that humanity has to, in order to in order to ascend, has to also descend.
Right.
Mhm.
You can't, there's no choice of just like, you can't just ascend or just descend. You
Mhm.
have to have a combined motion of descent and ascent,
Yeah.
Mhm.
right?
Yeah. I think that's the
Because you
idea
have
of
to
yeah.
incorporate, like the mic you have to incorporate everything that's part of your like microcosm, like fully, before you can ascend.
Mhm. Yeah. I
So
think he
So
goes
is it then a simultaneous ascension and descension, or is it a descension and then ascension?
I think it's cyclical, and I think he does suggest that in other parts of the book. And I,
Okay.
I would say it's like, it's kind of like cyclical. There's like, we go down, you know, we go up and we get up as far as we can, and in order to get back up further, we have to descend again. So it's like this, it's a cycle. Like, I know you and Jess, Sherry, are often talking about the U-shaped journey.
Yeah, that's what I'm
I
thinking
think
about.
that's the pattern, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
descent and descent, and
Yeah.
it's not just, it's not really just one U though.
No,
It's a repeating U.
well, it's a
Um,
fractal. It's a
a
fractal,
fractal U, yeah. Mhm.
right?
and
And a
he
fractal
makes it,
U.
yeah. Right. He makes it the next few pages you can see, I mean, all of his diagrams are fractals in a sense.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. 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 Yeah.
He kind of
Um,
makes, yeah, there's a little picture on the next page that kind of looks at it. So like man's in the middle, and then
right.
what we observe in terms of our science, like for man, then you have cell, molecule, atom, electron, then the center, which is nothing. And then for man up, you have humanity, life, earth, sun, galaxy, whole. So I think it is this
Right.
kind of simultaneous chimera almost.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And he uses some language of like, basically, if you're talking about two things that you compare their greatest common measure and their least common multiple. So like, the 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 largest thing that they're both mutually a part of, and then the smallest thing that they're both mutually part of. So like if you were talking about, let's say, um well, actually give some examples. Let's see here. So for instance, if I take this hand, my dog, the flowers on the table, and the fly on the window pane, their GCM is the cell and their LCM is life. If I take this hand, this pen and paper and ink, and the relevant pair is earth molecule, and so on. So basically it's just like a way of like finding the proper like um hierarchical link between the things you're talking about. So I didn't really find, to be honest with you, I didn't find that. I don't know why he even did that.
Yeah, it is a little, it's a little clunky.
It's really, really convoluted. And to me, I find like the pairs to me are on their own intuitive enough. I mean, I already understand why the center is related to the whole because of philosophy and theology and everything you said in the book before. Um, um, he, it's, he's galaxy nebula is related to like, electron or particle, sun to atom. That one's super intuitive because like
Yeah.
the sun, I mean, their stars are literally atomic factories, right? So the relation between sun and atom is, and I think he's saying like the reason he says galaxy slash nebula is he's thinking of like like gas
Electron
clouds and
cloud. Yeah.
electron clouds. Yeah, exactly. Giving way to star formation. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the planet being composed of molecules is pretty obvious
Yeah. The
relationship there.
molecule. Yeah.
Life
The
of
molecules.
cell
Yeah.
and
Configured to
humanity of
make
man.
Earth.
So
Yeah.
they're all pretty intuitive, like without that, like I'm not quite sure what the utility of knowing like what the common link between those, that seems to be intuitive too.
Yeah.
So
I think,
yeah.
do you think that he's also pointing out the symmetry of it all?
Yes.
Like, which I find kind of fascinating.
Yes.
Symmetry is also, it's always really interesting to me because symmetry is what we find beautiful. Oftentimes, if something isn't symmetrical, it's often considered ugly.
Yeah, even equations, even mathematical equations
Right.
take that form as well.
It's interesting. One thing I did find interesting though is that he's very clear, like particularly in the next section where he talks about like basically like kind of like the way things function within the hierarchical structure, like where he's talking how like your superior is always like one level up the hierarchy. Which kind of like he's kind of showing, so even though he's talking about like the natural hierarchical like order of the cosmos, he's showing how human hierarchies are still kind of broken because they're horizontal hierarchies. Like it's not appropriate for a man to have power and dominion over another man. That's not in accordance with the principles of the hierarchy. What's appropriate is for something that is above you in the hierarchy to have
I think it's
that
the case.
relationship.
It's the case that which is above you has the power. I think that we're mistaken. The whole powers and principalities, since we've kind of effaced that idea. And he says here later, he says, to put the matter in another way, it is easier to get in touch with archangels than your next door neighbor, for only they can introduce you. In the last resort, the heavens sponsor every meeting under heaven. But we have long forgotten what it is to live on every starlit night under the very eyes of higher authority. So it's like, you can't even have this engagement with another human without the superior element being present, in a sense. I think
Well, this is why ancient cultures have like god kings, right? Because it's like it implicitly like recognizes that like there's a like we kind of like this is something that like once upon a time we kind of intuited. Like we knew that like the legitimate authority to rule had to actually come from the heavens.
from on
Otherwise there was no
So democracy is the exact opposite of that. Right?
Yes.
So it's like, that's another of we're reaching the bottom, right? We're reaching the bottom in terms of science finding the quantum field. And then in terms of politics is this democracy, atomized democracy. Well, there's nowhere to go but up in a sense, you know?
Well, but then again, like, but even the, I mean, because even like, so maybe intuitively those older structures understood that, like, you know, what was at the top of the hierarchy had to have its authority from above. Like the concept of principalities and powers tells you that is about the fact that that their that claim is coming from an illegitimate source in the hierarchy, because those principalities and powers are under condemnation.
Well, they
So,
weren't at
and
first though, right?
the,
They're right, weren't they?
I don't know if you look at the book of Samuel, it's like, I mean, God's like, okay, you want a king, sure, not because this is not, and God's very clear about this is not what I want, but I'm going to give you what you desire, and this is what it's going to look like, and it's not a pretty picture.
Yeah. So
that
he
is
knew
painted.
the angels would fall.
Right.
That was after the Tower of Babel, right? He distributed the nations, and then he put
or were already fallen. Like, so he
Yeah.
knew that it would lead to corruption and to just more power and domination, because like they fell under the same like spell that we did, right?
Yeah.
Which is to be very confused about like what power is.
Yeah. And then when Christ came, he had to be like, Dad, forgive them. They know not what they're doing. Stop putting it in their hands. Like they know not what they're doing.
Everything he does looks totally ridiculous. Because it's like, because when we see what actual power look like, it doesn't look like power to us. It looks like anything but.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
You know, it's like, you know, it's like, but it is really powerful too, though. And you can see the power of it. Like if you see, like, you know, Pilate's reaction to Jesus's silence, right? It's like, oh, but it's not a self-asserting, you know, it's not kind of power. It's not a grasping, grabbing, domineering kind of power. It's something else.
You know the story of Saint Moses the Black in the Orthodox Church?
No, please share it with us.
So he was a Ethiopian. They called him Saint Moses the Black, Saint Moses the Ethiopian in the 4th century, and he was black from Ethiopia, and he was part of a gang where he was under a slave of some nobleman, and then he ended up escaping, and then he became part of a gang, and then he found himself like a ruthless gang, and long story short, he found himself in a monastery. He was hiding from some captors, and in that monastery he had a experience. And then long story short, he later on, he goes, as he's becoming a monk, he goes into a room where all of the higher monks were talking, and they came to him and they said, "What's this man doing here? He's black. He's not one of us. Why is he here?" And Saint Moses the Black didn't respond. He just stayed there in silence. And then later on, one of the monks says, "They were ridiculing you. Weren't you hurt? Why didn't you say anything?" He says, "Oh, I was grieved, but I stayed silent." And that's what brought him into the sainthood, in a sense. Like he realized how to leverage real power. I think that's just maybe a tangent here. It speaks a lot to what's happening now and how to work through that, right? Because with all this reaction, right, and the real courage is to stay silent. And then in this silence, it's not to capitulate or to be passive. It's like a real power is to stand there and not flinch, in a sense. It's a beautiful story.
Well, yeah, because I think what it's kind of tied to like there's an irony here, because real power, real peace comes through a giving up of this idea of autonomy, that we can have it our way and on our terms. Like, so when when it's not up to you, right? So it's like that's kind of like that's where that's where the power comes in, because you know that you're okay.
Mhm.
You know
There's
that you're,
also,
and it frees. Go ahead, Sherry.
well, there's also, this idea of silence or non-action, let's say, like, um, what it does is it causes the person who's thrusting themselves out there, right? Like, because that's so in the case of the monk, he's standing in a room and they're throwing insults at him. They're throwing, like, you could imagine they're throwing things at him, right?
Right.
And he's just taking it, and suddenly it what it does is it mirrors themselves back to themselves, right? It mirrors their actions back to them, because they can't react to anything he's doing because he isn't doing anything,
Right.
right?
Right.
So
Right.
so all of their blows, all of their insults, in the case of Jesus, it's the same thing. They fall, they fall to the ground, right? And then you're just left with you and your emotion and your insults and your own actions. Like, what? And it's a mirror, and it makes you, as the perpetrator, have to question what you're doing. Like, there suddenly the world is full of nuance, right?
Mhm.
Whereas
Right.
before,
Because
if the person is reacting back to you, then it's just
whoops.
it's just it's a case of black and white, right?
Right.
If the person is like, they hit you, you hit them, right? And someone's going to win and someone's going to lose. Like, the world is then very dualistic. But if one person remains silent and takes the insults and the blows, then suddenly the world becomes very nuanced. Then you have to say, what am I doing?
Well,
Like,
it's kind of like an act. I mean, it's an active embrace, like, and that's in a situation like you're describing. That's like an active embracing of the scapegoat role and a refusal of mimetic rivalry.
Mhm.
Like,
right.
you're,
Yeah.
This is what Girard says Christ did, was he mirrored
yeah,
them back to themselves. So I wasn't thinking about
and that's
Girard when
pretty.
I said
It's
that.
right, right, yeah. But that is pretty obviously what he's doing. If you look at like his behavior, like in the text, it's like, oh yeah, that's exactly what he's like. I'm not playing your game.
Mhm.
The
Yeah.
game is
Right.
corrupt and wrong. I'm going to show you what real power looks like, and
Mhm.
it's nothing like what you think it is.
Yeah.
Real power is is the self-sacrifice of love that is so powerful it has the power to create a universe out of nothing.
Mhm.
So it's
Yeah.
Yeah.
completely, you have the completely inverted idea
Yeah.
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
what it is.
Gerard's mimetic rivalry came to mind as well. And what also came to mind is, like, kids know this in a strange way. Cause, like, I have my daughter, if I'll be like, getting upset at her, and I'll be like, okay, you want to go to timeout? She'll be like, yes, I do. And I'm like, oh man, or something. You try to get them, and they throw it back, or they don't respond. And then you're at a loss. And I kind of try to, they're outwit, like my son, he was like, he said something, he talked back like, why didn't you do that? Because I didn't want to. And then I didn't do anything. And my wife's like, you're going to let him talk to you like that? I said, for this time, I'm going to do it. I'm not going to react, because a lot of times the kids, they want the reaction. So my daughter will act out, like scratch the baby. And then, I'll freak out, and that's what she wants. She's like, yes, she doesn't care the punishment. She just wants the reaction. So it's like, don't react, don't react, don't react.
Well, yeah, I
The
think,
babes get it.
right. I think it's related to attention. We want it so badly that we don't care what form we get it in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's like,
Ain't that the truth for sure? I mean, social media. I mean, think about the like button when it comes to that, or any reaction like that.
yeah, right, yeah. Yeah,
It's crazy.
we just feed off it. We just feed off it. And the more, and here's the thing, is like the more we feed off of that, the less we are able to do what we're actually called to do, which is to give attention, and to give the right kind of attention. To
No,
give
Mhm.
the kind of attention that that isn't like the kind of that isn't like that isn't the isn't an attention that turns things into mere objects, but is an attention that humanizes.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
go
there
ahead.
was
Jamie.
yeah, go ahead.
I'm just having a thought about this silence thing. It's it's interesting because, Harding talks about, coming together with another person and entering into each other's concentric circles and becoming something, right? Like it's that relational idea that, that you don't become unless you're in relationship to something, right?
Mm-hmm.
You don't exist at
Right.
all.
I think that
You
plays
might.
in. I think that plays into this stance of doing nothing.
It's
The
a refusal of the wrong kinds of relationships because it would, right. Because if you, yeah, because in your silence, you can still, you can still be in relation to God in your silence, right? But you
Sure.
can't, that may be the only way to like refuse like, participation in this like negative kind of relation that you're
Right. And in
being
that
called into.
process, it can stop someone from becoming something that they shouldn't, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
Right.
and it exposes the power that's underlying. Like, what else came to mind was the not the Kavanaugh kids. What were the kids that had the Native American gentleman
Yeah.
was banging the drums, and what did they do there? They just
Yeah.
sat there, and then everybody's like, "Look, they're white supremacists. Look there." But then when the broader context came out, it's like they just sat there while people were hurling stuff at them, and
Mhm.
it kind of exposed. You saw this power that was effective there. And what also came to mind is Gandhi, right? I mean, he changed the whole geopolitical situation in India with his specific non-reactive way, right? He decolonized India, right? In terms of against the British, in a sense. So it's this, but it gets couched into, it's not passive. It's like the opposite of passive, but it appears passive in a sense. How about in the meditators in Thailand and Vietnam that were meditating and were burned alive as they,
Yeah.
have you seen those pictures? It's
Yeah.
crazy. So they
Yeah.
just sat there and meditated. Some of them lit themselves on fire, actually.
Yeah.
So it's
Self-immolated. Yeah.
that I can get out of hand, obviously, as well.
Right.
I think so. Yeah.
Well, but that's like, but here's the thing though. I would say that that's an example of improper sacrifice
Yeah.
because that like that self-immolation, that's a transactional sacrifice.
Yeah.
That's like you're appealing to the divine to honor your demand
Mm-hmm.
through your sacrifice of burning
Mm-hmm.
yourself alive.
Yeah. Yeah,
Or
definitely.
and then and I think like suicide is also the same thing. It's like it's an improper sacrifice. It's like it's for different reasons. Suicide is not transactional.
Mm-hmm.
That's just done out of like, I would say, just like a resentment of being,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
which
Yeah.
is an anti-sacrifice because it's a refusal of the ultimate gift. Like the
Mm-hmm.
fact that you exist at all, that's the ultimate gift. That's only made possible. It's only made possible by the self-sacrifice of the divine. Like that is, otherwise you don't exist at all. So so it makes it kind of an anti-sacrifice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because a proper sacrifice is a reciprocating of that gift exchange.
Mm-hmm. You got to do it for the lower part of the hierarchy, right? Sacrifice for the lower part.
Or offer up what little you have to God, or to offer it up to another. It's like, I mean, it's just the point is that it 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 needs to be done with no expectation of anything in return at all.
It needs to be done as a form of participation in being.
Correct.
Mm-hmm. With
Right.
love, for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, like at the cellular level, like your body's constantly, cells are dying constantly, right? For the greater good, they're constantly forming and dying in order for the whole to continue to exist. And that can
Has-
get out of hand too, right? Cancer.
Has the Orthodox Church kept the early Christian tradition of gift exchange uh, intact, at least in some of in some of its liturgical calendar? I'm just curious because that's actually something that the very early church actually like understood this so well that it was like built right into the practices, like so that there was a post communion gift exchange
Yeah, I'm not
amongst the
sure.
members of the church.
I'm not sure.
So yeah.
I mean, there's Christmas, right?
Right. Yeah. Right. Yes. Right. Right. Yes. There is Christmas. Yes. We still have Christmas. We've kept that. But boy, we've made that transactional for sure, haven't we?
Oh, a little bit,
Just a little.
only transactional,
It
essentially.
depends on the intent. It depends on intent, right? And you can't, it's hard to judge that.
Yeah, it really like I know that's like a cliche. It's the thought that counts. And most people, when they say it, they don't really mean it.
Yeah.
But that's
It's not
really
just the
actually
thought,
that is actually to understand what the actual nature of gift is. That is actually the case.
Mhm.
It is in fact the or I would say not really the thought so much as the spirit spirit of the gift. Is it given with no expectation of receiving anything in return, and is it superfluous? Is it overflowing? Is it, I mean, those are the things that are characteristic of something that is
And the thing is,
true
Nate,
gift.
I
Yeah.
would say that is one of the hardest things to do, even if you
Oh,
want,
for sure.
is to give a gift with no
Yeah.
expectations, right?
Right.
Yeah. And you can
Sure.
you can
Yeah.
tell when somebody does it, but it's not obvious how you can tell if somebody gives a gift.
Yeah.
It's not
Yeah,
like
you kind
it's
of
almost
know.
yeah, it's like spiritual. Like if somebody truly gives it to you.
And there's
as a
usually a little
gift,
bit
yeah.
of guilt like associated when someone does that too, because it's like you have to think about like, oh my goodness, it's like
Right.
how come I don't do this more often?
Yeah.
It's like
And
Right.
culturally, we feel like we need to reciprocate, right? So there, yeah, and that poses problems because
well, no, reciprocation is okay, but it just can't be. Here's the thing: you actually.
it
So I think God
becomes-
wants it reciprocated. He wants it reciprocated over and over again. He wants as much of it as possible, but he wants every single gift that is reciprocated to be done without the expectation of that reciprocation. That's the
Mhm.
right.
Yeah, and the
that's the
reciprocation
catch.
and the
Yeah.
reciprocation itself can't be done through the guilt. Like you
Right.
can't be like
Right.
you can't be
Right.
like, oh, you're not going to outgift me, son. All right, here you go. You know,
Yeah, right.
which
Right.
is the case a lot. Like I noticed it in myself just recently. Like a neighbor helped me out with my sprinklers, and I'm like, hey man, let me wash your windows and stuff. I had him over for dinner, but like and it's at one level, it's like that's what we need is kind of these reciprocal neighbor helping neighbor. And if you're not doing it in a perfectly graceful way, it's okay. Do it anyways.
Mhm.
Like fake it till you make it when it comes to reciprocal gift giving. I think
Yeah,
from a neighbor's perspective.
yeah,
Right. Well, I think like good parenting is like one of those gifts that we give to our children, where if you're a good parent, there's no reciprocal expectation, right?
Mhm.
It's like
Yeah,
you
but you
just are-
get it in return.
you do,
but-
right? But
yeah.
yes, exactly. And the child is not the child, when they're really like loving you back in that way that just like melts your heart, they're not doing it
Yeah.
in a transactional way either. It is a spontaneous reciprocation.
But if you spoil them, right, then
Right.
you're trying to win their affection, and that causes the spoil. In a
See, I
sense.
think like, and this is like this right here is so close to the right model of like of what being is supposed to be about. Like that's why I think that this is why the church is modeled after the family.
Mhm.
Like this is why we call each other brother and sister. This is why the priest is called father. This is why we call the church mother.
It's
Mhm.
like a meta family.
Right. It's right. And I would say like it's like, well, we call it, I mean, sometimes we call it that sometimes we call the church the house of God, right? That's
Mhm.
exactly right.
Mhm.
Because the church is modeled after oikos and not polis. That's like,
Mhm.
and I'm sure and now that I have a Greek speaker, I'm sure I'm butchering my pronunciation, but
No, you got it.
you get my point.
Yeah.
So yeah, And that's like familial love. Like that's like what the church is supposed to be striving to
Yeah.
put into the world.
Well, I think the same thing that's happened to families has happened to the church, and the idea now is to throw both out. That we need to deconstruct the nuclear family, and that churches
Right.
are inherently corrupt.
Right.
Not that there's
But
no,
who's
yeah,
driving the deconstruction of the family and why?
it's happening.
Right.
I.
But it's the state. And there's
Hmm.
a reason why, because the state wants this individualism absolutely serves the interest of the state, because the state wants you to be merely, as much as possible, wants you to be a merely atomized individual in a state of complete dependence on it, because
Hmm.
that maximizes its power. And that's what the state exists for, ultimately, is to optimize its own level of power and control, while offering you a false peace in exchange for that, what you give up to it,
That's why I
which
think
is
if you don't give into that, right, the state doesn't like that, but it shows the power of the state. Just like if you're silent, like if you don't accept the help of the state and just you kind of do it on your own or through yourself, you're looked at as negatively. But it's like it
right,
exposes the
yes,
power, just the power that's
right,
being
which is
leveraged
why
here.
more of us need to do it. Like
Yeah.
really seriously, it's just like, don't, just stop. Like, don't even wait around for the state to do anything. Let's There's no point in talking about policy changes. It doesn't, none of it really matters.
Hmm.
We need to build the communities that we want, and we need to build the churches that we want, that are a reflection of that familial love that the church is supposed to be about, which
Yeah.
is completely different from what the state is about.
Yeah. Totally. I totally agree. I think especially young people, they are applying what they've missed in a family or what they even received in a family to the state. They're like, oh, the state's just like a big family. So,
Right.
so they're used to be like communism is this idea that,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know, you,
Communist. Basically, you have the state runs one of two directions, right? It either, and both of them are and both of them are ultimately about power control. It's either individualism or collectivism,
mhm,
and both
fascism
it
or communism. Yeah.
right. Individualism and collectivism are both wrong. Like
Hmm.
the model is personalism.
Hmm.
With personalism, it's a triune model, essentially, because you have, it's neither the chaos of like everyone pursuing their self-interest and having no other concerns ad infinitum, with
Hmm.
nothing to unify them ultimately, as the system breaks down, as there's no value structure. There used to be a personalist value structure that underpinned it, that gave it a relatively, you know, a relative degree of stability, but that's completely gone, right? As that's gone away, it's like it's just more and more chaos, more and more like basically endless mimetic rivalry, and the war of all against all is what it's turned into. And then on
Hmm.
the collectivist end, it's like it's just a flat unity, where your only identity comes from like your group, and you like there's no room for you to actually be a person.
Hmm. Yeah.
So I mean, a person is neither an atomized individual nor simply a faceless member of a collective.
Yeah.
A person is a relational being that is completely dependent upon, hopefully, positive relationships with others. I mean, that the more positive relationships you have, the more fully human you're going to become.
Hmm. And with institutions and with the whole, in a sense. I
Right.
think of a cell. Right? I think of the organs of the body as institutions, right? And then the
Mhm.
body being the nation, let's say, right? Like
Right.
you can't just have one blob and call it a nation. Like you have
Mhm.
to have
Right.
differentiated cells into institutions, which organize, the energy transfer and create an identity. Like you can't have an identity without differentiated
Yeah, we
organs,
used to have like, I mean,
institutions.
if you look at like, yes, if you look at like the earlier model, we had like all of these like communitarian, like intermediary institutions that have been just systematically destroyed by the state intentionally, really,
Hmm.
because it's a block. it it blocks its own maximization of its power.
Hmm.
So it
Yeah.
doesn't want those things. So it's like it's weakened all those institutions as much as possible. And the reason the family is under attack is because that's the last one standing.
Yeah. And then there's the local police, which is the last protective measure protecting the families. Right? You notice there's no outcry against the FBI or the CIA. They're not getting protested against. It's about local communities, local police communities, right, that are having all of these, have all this energy leveraged against them. So
Well,
because they
because the
want
local
they want
level,
a
right,
monolith. They want a
right,
monolith in
because the
terms of law
local
enforcement.
level is the only place where community can actually happen because it is really dependent on relations, and there are only so many relations that any individual person can have.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
these communities necessarily have to be small and local
Mm-hmm.
to function.
Yep.
There's
Just
no
like
other way
your
to do it.
because you have
So,
organs, your heart, your lungs, liver, they're all communities of cells that have
right.
functions. So it's like,
Yes.
I just want one body with no organs. I want one nation without institutions. It doesn't work. It's like, that's why I like this fractal understanding, because you can tell the truth by trying to apply it at multiple levels. Like, that's why you need
But it's like
institutions,
even well, I mean even like the system like that we're under now is like even the state is sort of like kind of a anachronism really, because what you really have is like you have these like large multinational corporations that are actually controlling the nation states. They're like literally writing the laws for like most of
Mhm.
the industrialized world. They're dictating the laws, they're dictating the policy, and they just want consumers.
Mhm. Yeah. And their
And you know,
counterparts in the government. Yeah.
and who's a better consumer? Someone who's a fully relational being that belongs to community organizations and has these healthy, strong like interpersonal bonds and is really living as a person, or someone who's just like an isolated, atomized individual that can just be turned into a consumer slave, which is more
Mhm.
beneficial.
Mm.
Yeah. And that's been championed and amplified through COVID and whatnot, right? With everybody being socially distant and whatnot, how can
Yeah.
that not tear up the familial bonds? And then the the counterpart to the corporate overlords are this: we've distributed all of our power and our resources to these alphabet agencies now, which aren't elected. So you have the FDA, right, and all of these that write the laws as well with their corporate counterparts, but they're not accountable to the people. So Congress has abdicated its duty to these agencies that are completely corrupt, and there's nothing you can do about it because you can't vote them out. It's
Right.
like
Oh,
a
the
catch
politicians
22.
are really just. The politicians are really just like they don't even really run the government, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
really like it's all it's these technicians, you know. It's just it's I
Uh,
mean it's the system of technique, you know, which is a Lil's idea, but that's what it is. I mean, that's like it's
there was
like
this, yeah.
everyone just, and it doesn't, all of this. I'm by the way, and I'm not suggesting any kind of like global conspiracy. Like there's a cabal of like elite global bankers that are getting together in a smoke-filled room somewhere and planning. No,
Mm-hmm.
it's just it is a collusion of interests, which and the main interest is power, wanting to maintain power, and then the other factor is like a highly technical, highly bureaucratic society where everyone just focuses on doing this one little thing that I've been assigned to do and not and thinking about minute parts and not
Yeah.
looking at holes.
I'd almost wish it was a
And that's how
cabal
we
of, yeah,
educate people too. That's
yeah,
how we educate people. Yeah.
yeah.
Yes, it would be
It,
much simpler if it were just like a cabal of people that we could just take out with a surgical strike. It
if it
would
was
make it
just the
much easier.
reptilians, if it was just the reptilians,
Yeah, right.
we actually be better shape. To bring it back to
Yes.
the book here, there's actually a good
Yeah.
a paragraph here that
Let's hear it.
kind of stood out to me here, bottom of 139. Um, I won't read the whole thing. I'll just read that bottom paragraph. He says, to speak in terms of human organizations, the four phases are described thusly. So the consolidation of scattered workers, resulting in economies, increased effectiveness and growth. I think of that like the post-war America,
Right,
right?
right, right.
So, and then he says, over centralization with further uneconomical increases of staff, instability, and external ineffectiveness. And he says decentralization with release of the redundant staff acquired in and restored effectiveness, and then further dispersal beyond an economic limit, resulting in the need for new staff and in renewed effectiveness. And this is the part here. So he says, briefly, the inferior members of the pair. So grow and give, which is post-war, post-war Western government, and then
Mhm.
grow and take, right? which was 50s and 60s, and then
Right.
ungrow and give, right? And then we're at the end of this, the ungrow and take. So grow and give, then you have grow and take, and then ungrow and give, where you're not growing anymore, but you're giving what you don't have, right? So you're just moving the pie around. You're not creating more pie. And then you have grow, then you have ungrow and take. So now we have the looting of our coffers, by all of these institutions and corrupt politicians. So we're at the end of a life cycle, and he ties this into this whole. I think it speaks really poignantly to how the government is working, and he talks this in terms of social human organization. So he says, again, one more time briefly, you have grow and give, where things are going well, you're growing and you're able to distribute, and then grow and take. Right, you're growing, but you're becoming greedy, and then you stop growing. Right, you're off the gold standard. Now you're on fiat currency, right, and you're through credit cards and credit systems, you're giving away something that you no longer have, and then ungrow and take. So there's no more growth, and the limits of credit have bore themselves out. So all you can do is loot the ship as it's sinking, in a sense. And after that, it's the end of the entity.
Like lending $4.2 trillion to the most powerful interest in the country so they can consolidate their power even further, something like that.
That's about right. Yeah. How about $10 billion? $10 billion to the richest man in the world for space, for his space, for his risky investment that didn't pan out. And he goes, hey, can I get $10 billion from the human beings that make up our?
This is interesting though. Right after that, he says throughout they give and take from the superior member.
Yeah.
What would you make of that? Like in this analogy. So if you're like, what is the superior member if you were talking about if the level of analysis here is human institutions?
I think the commons, right? Or the commons or the resources of Earth.
Humanity
would be the superior, right? Humanity, we're extracting resources.
Or the nation.
Yeah.
Probably the nation
member
since
is
we're
that
talking about
which gives
institutions. Yeah.
So the superior member is that which informs the identity of the entity, right? So that the collective, right? And then you start looting and taking resources. It's the superior member. So when the nation dies, right, the people still live there, right? The identity of the nation, just like when your body dies, right? The molecules in the cells, they all go back into the earth, but the actual identity, the superior member, is no longer there, right? When a building falls, the Twin Towers, that rubble's still there and it gets distributed back into the earth, right? But the identity is no longer there. Same thing with governments, right? You still have
because principalities and powers don't have bodies. They have to have a body to possess, whether it be, an institution or a person or whatever. I mean, that's like, there has to be. Yeah. So yeah.
Was America a principality and a power? New York is, right? America is. I think Jonathan was talking with, it is.
I think he uses Uncle Sam, right? It's kind of like the symbolic representation of America. Yeah.
That is a great way to introduce someone to the idea of powers and principalities of like, what makes, New Yorkers have a certain feel to them, a certain, a New Yorker, they have a certain quality to them. When you go in New York, it's got a certain flavor. What is it about people from New York that makes them a certain way? Or Boston, right? It's
this came up.
It's the spirit.
This came up in our estuary host support conversation, and like someone was talking, they were using the example of Chicago in this case, and then he said, but Chicago doesn't have a body, and I said, what are you talking about? Chicago doesn't have a body. It's like, what do you think the Sears Tower is? What do you think? Like, what do you think Soldier Field is? Like, all of these things are part of the body of Chicago. Absolutely has a body.
Pan pizza, right? Pan pizza.
Yeah, right.
Cubs.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, it's part of the body of Chicago, for sure.
Yeah.
And if that body ceased to exist, so would Chicago.
Yep. So the identity, the spirit departs, and the physical matter's still there. There's still the tower. You know what I'm saying? There's still the physical elements that make up that area, but it's not Chicago anymore.
Not like Chicago Rome, anymore.
You can think of many examples like this.
Right.
I think it's really useful.
Right. Although I think Rome seems to be something that kind of like repeats itself.
Hmm.
I mean,
Right.
you know, I think we're Rome.
Yeah, for sure. I
We're
think
Rome now.
Trump was Augustus, right?
or Nero.
Or Nero. Yeah, actually, that's the
I think
somebody made
Nero.
that connection.
Nero.
Yeah.
Yeah, Nero seems like to be the really. And I'm not suggesting he was the Antichrist, just for clarity's sake here. I
Yeah.
don't buy it. I don't read the book that way. Just I'm actually doing a separate discussion on my channel about how that involves how I actually read that text. But no, I don't do that.
You guys,
The
you
whole
got,
time you guys were talking, I kept thinking about the Bach Apocalypse of John,
Oh
because
really?
like I prepared for the wrong chapters today,
Oh
and
right,
that
right.
section that I did, man, it was really. I mean, I found it super interesting
so tell me a
because
little bit about that book, or why you guys are interested in it, or what you're finding from those conversations, since we kind of got through the 2 short chapters.
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
I'll just give you my reasons for wanting to take a look at that text. Like first of all, it's like I discovered that it exists by reading a review that Owen Barfield had written on the owenbarfield.org, like, basically the academic site for like cataloging the work of Owen Barfield. They have like a links to a bunch of old articles of Owen Barfield, and he had written a review of it, and I'm like, he talked about like what a great symbolic reading of the Apocalypse of John was, and it's like I'd been thinking in the back of my head, of well, I hadn't been able to find a decent like hard copy of. I was interested in reading um Sergei Bulgakov's analysis of the Apocalypse of John, but this one turned out to be like more affordable, more accessible. I was more readily able to find a decent hard copy of it. So I'm like, okay, I'll do the Bulgakov one later. I'll just do this Emil Bach text. But I was particularly interested because it's a symbolic reading, and it's like, to me, it's like I was raised with like a typical like, Pentecostal evangelical, like very word by word literal, but still prophetic reading of the text that was like, you couldn't say, it's like it was kind of like attempting a symbolic reading, but it was a symbolic reading that was rooted in the literalism of the text rather than an actual symbolic reading.
Mhm.
And
so more like a one-to-one, like this
yeah, like
represents this and
let's
that.
find what does this thing represent, let's go find this thing in the world.
Right, yeah,
That's what
And
it's
like
doing, or it's not doing that.
that's what it did. That's like
Okay.
that's not what box text does.
Oh,
That's the
okay.
kind of reading of a text that I was, the kind of thing that led to like, things like Hal Lindsey's The Late Great Planet Earth, and like, the identification of Gog and Magog with Russia. Whoops, guess we got that wrong. And all these other
Yeah.
kinds of like, very specific, like we're like, and all the looking under the rock for the Antichrist game, all that kind of treatment of the text. And it's like I had like I had basically developed an allergy to the text, where it's just like it's like I read it a lot as a kid because it was super important in the tradition that I was raised in. And but none of I did couldn't make any sense of it, nor did any of the things I was hearing about it make any sense. So I'm just like, I kind of just like basically wrote it off as like just mad ravings, basically,
Hmm.
is what I ended up thinking about it. Like certainly that's what I thought about it in my agnostic phase. It's like it's just an incoherent text. So I read this review and it's like, okay, I think it's time for me to go back now, like with a fresh set of eyes, and to try to read this text in a new way, and to not necessarily, and I'm using Bach as sort more of an inspiration for how to read the text. There are things that he says that I agree with, and there are things that he says that I don't that I don't agree with. But I am trying to read the text in a symbolic way.
Hmm.
Using Bach as kind of my guide as I attempt to do that. So that's what the discussions are about.
Yeah.
And it's very dense. It's a very dense text with like, he really goes into great detail about all these different layers of symbolism. And there's a lot to unravel there. So we've been going through it very slowly. We started with our first discussion. We just got through the forward, and then we've been going like one chapter at a time. We just did our fourth discussion on it, and we were just getting through chapter 3. And so the discussion we just had was on chapter 3, and his chapter 3 covers the text of Revelation chapter 4 and chapter 5. And the big takeaway from that, for me at least, is that Emil Bach reads the heavenly throne scene in Revelation 4 and the image of the Lamb in chapter 5 as a telling of Genesis from the heavenly point of view, whereas Genesis is showing the same story from like kind of the earthly point of view. So it's showing like it's kind of like this is an image of what was going on in the heavens while creation was happening. So like when the lamb comes forward to open the seals, that's actually like opening the possibility. Like that's what inaugurates like the creation itself, like the beginning of time. That's what allows.
Yeah, one thing I can say, James, is he has a really in-depth working knowledge of ancient symbolism. So like some of the things that he just kind of flatly lays out as matter of factly, as a, this represents this, let's say. Some of those things I've had to look up and found that
when you fact checked him, he knows what he's talking about.
Yeah, every time he's not just spouting off some idea of his own. He's actually looking at, the way that ancient people would have seen these.
Yeah.
What these things would have meant to them, what these things would have actually symbolized for them, right?
Yeah.
Even the color.
And he's also honest enough to consider multiple symbolic readings of the same thing.
Yeah.
So he doesn't say like, which is how symbolism really works anyway, right? So it's like it's not like there's ever just one correct reading of a symbol. It always has potential nuances and layers, and that's the nature of it. So, and I really appreciate that he does that. It's where he's like, this could be seen to mean this or this, but it also might mean this.
Right.
So
yeah.
And this is and he'll be honest about which interpretation he favors, but he will present, like sometimes he'll present like multiple, like for example, when he talks about the four beasts, like he talks about like how like there's a traditional association with the beast with like the with the writers of the gospel of the four gospels, and he talks about like their potential connection to the zodiac, but then like he says that he ultimately thinks that they actually like represent like the group souls of animals and the unfolding of like of the movement of evolution toward the fullness of man. So they're like kind of represent like the animal souls and also parts of what make up a proper fully human being at the same time. So like for example, the lion represents the emotional heart of the man, and the bull represents the will, and so on.
Yeah, interesting.
Oh, and that the one with the face of the man represents like the completed, like the human being that has all of the characteristics.
That subsumes the
that takes up all the rest. Right.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm not really familiar with the text at all.
It's pretty obscure.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like I actually picked up another one of his.
Wait, you mean the text of Revelation or the text?
Text of Revelation.
Oh, I thought you meant box text. Yeah.
No, this is Revelation.
Revelation. Yeah, Revelation's not real. I guess my understanding is that Revelation isn't really read much in.
Yeah.
Orthodox.
Well, it's part of, but it's not. Well, I'm not too familiar with the liturgical readings. Since I haven't been going regularly in a while, And I understand that Revelation isn't, and it was you that told me, I think, Shari, this kind of resonated, that, Revelation is the church in a
Mhm.
sense, right? It's not read because you're stepping into it.
Right.
And it makes me, because they say heaven is located on earth and it's in the church. So when you're going to church, you're stepping into to heaven. And then the way that the dome is situated with Christ, and then the angels, you actually have the what's it called, the tetramorph, right? You have everything represented, so the whole story culminates in the architecture of the church, not just the architecture.
So the Orthodox Church sees Revelation as a cosmic liturgy.
Mhm.
Yeah,
What
that's
it is.
Bach reads
And-
it the same way.
And
He actually says, like, particularly about that particular section that we were discussing, that's what he actually says. He says that's what's going on, is that it is a cosmic liturgy that's going
Yeah.
on.
And this is the reason why the church itself is modeled after the book of Revelation. Like, you have the altar, you have the gospels on the altar, which represent the lamb, you have the candlesticks, you have all those things going on, right?
Right.
And the way the liturgy is set up, yeah, it's a replication of the cosmic liturgy in the text. And I have to admit that reading Bach, and like I said this today, he gets some things wrong. We might, like, this idea of group souls, for example, is an anthroposophic idea, right? The anthroposopha believe that the animals have a group soul.
Mhm.
That is not the position of the Orthodox Church. So there's no such thing as group souls in the church, right?
They do have souls, though, right? In
They
the
have
church,
soul.
yeah.
They believe that, well, they do. Yes.
They're just different than human souls.
They're different. Yeah.
Yeah.
And but there's the group soul thing is definitely anthroposophic.
Mhm.
But some of the things like that, they're kind of few and far between in the book.
Yeah,
right?
they really
They're
are.
they're not overwhelming. Like, he's not proselytizing for anything.
No, not
And
at all.
I find him doing a very good job of it.
He's just
and
like, yeah, he's
it's-
someone who's very educated in, like, the symbolism of the of ancient Near Eastern cultures, and he's not very biased toward his own particular, like, I mean, he brings it up from time to time, but I do sense that mostly he's trying to give an honest symbolic reading of a text.
Yeah, and then something to keep in mind is that he's one of the founding members of the Christian community, which is not anthroposophic. Like, Rudolf Steiner kept distance from Rudolf Steiner. So, and Rudolf Steiner said that this is not my community. Like, I didn't start this community, but they took on some of his ideas, some of his anthroposophic ideas. So Bach is not an anthroposophic person, in that sense, right? But
I think it's more Christian, and I think one of the reasons it ends up being more Christian is because the liturgy was written by a Jewish convert. I know that sounds like an ironic thing to say, but I think that made it more biblically rooted, I think, than
Is it a long text?
anthroposophy.
Is that a long, thick text?
No, it's not. It's just very, like, it's just very dense reading. It's actually not long at all. It's like, let me see here, less than 200 pages. Yeah, less than 200 pages.
you can get it. I think I already did link.
No, you did.
And
say
it's
you
like,
sent me the PDF,
yeah. I mean, it's like, yeah, there's PDFs are freely available. There's no copyright on it. Even the hard copy I have is like, it's a reproduction that's public domain. It specifically says on the title page. So
You have to check it out.
yeah. So yeah, I recommend it. It's really, and it was just, it gave me a reason to, engage with the text that I'd been avoiding.
One thing I'd like to say about it is that it's really helping me to understand how Revelation is now.
Yes.
It's helping me to understand that it's in the present. It's not a future event.
Yeah.
I mean, it is also a future event, but it is now.
Yeah, I was listening
fractal.
to something the other day. Apparently, like, the traditional Orthodox reading of the the cycles of seven of the seven seals, the seven trumpets, and the seven vials of wrath is actually cyclical.
Mhm.
Hmm.
Like it's a repeating pattern. So, which is actually, to me, that's like, even then, that's actually a little love. That's a layer deeper and probably a little bit more resonant even than saying that it's the present, because it shows you that, because it connects you to it also connects you to the past and the future too. It's like it gives you more of a sense of like the flow of the cyclical and continuum nature of it.
So is it connected to the days of the week, or the 6 days of creation
Yeah, he
as well?
actually says that, like, he actually, and I agree with him on this. Like, this to me seems pretty obvious. Is like the symbolism of seven is related to time. So
Hmm.
it represents, like, seven represents the fullness of time, because
Yeah.
the base, because like the week is kind of like certainly like the base unit, like certainly within the liturgical year for sure, and for
Hmm.
both, and that goes even even in Judaism, right? It's like culminating in the Sabbath.
Yeah.
And
So
he yeah, he also talks about the how it moves. So Revelation begins in time. So it's seven of this, seven of that, seven vials of wrath, seven candlesticks, seven
right,
messages to the churches, 777. And then it goes, and then it moves, starts moving into space, which is represented by the number 12 or derivatives of 12. So
yeah,
Hmm.
12 and multiples of 12, because it represents like the zodiac basically, and the zodiac symbolically is the fullness of space. Because I mean, if you look at it from an old geocentric model, which is what this symbolic kind of images would be based on,
Hmm.
like the earth passes through as it circuits, or, well, the zodiac goes around the earth, I suppose, from a geocentric. So
Hmm.
it's passing through. 12 represents passing through the entire zodiac.
Mm.
So it's the fullness of space
Mhm.
Yeah.
symbolically.
Yeah. That sounds very interesting. Actually, I'm gonna have to check out that text. I mean, I read it a long while ago, the actual book of
Yeah,
Revelation. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Just find it hard to parse at
Well, if
all,
we ever
almost.
if we ever if we ever get a chance to get you in on one of our conversations, we'd be glad to have you sit in.
yeah,
If
Yeah, I'd
yeah.
love
you're
to.
out of time that works out.
I'd love to audit it.
Um,
Audit the
yeah, yeah,
class.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I think, like, our next one is going to be on chapter 4. So
Okay. Cool.
yeah, yeah. Well, thanks for joining me again, you guys.
Yep.
Let me just, appreciate it. Thanks for the conversation.
Yep. Thanks, guys.
Yep.
Thank you.